The radiator trim is a distinctive part of my Bedford truck, the kit featured in recent videos, and in this one I want to share how I did it. Not with paint, but with aluminium foil, capturing the glint of chrome, a technique that could be used on lots of models. The Bedford grille is quite an elaborate affair, with a whole bunch of slats, and thankfully it's only the wide ones we're going to foil. And for this I'm just using some bog standard kitchen foil, a small square of which I smoothed nice and flat. And equipped with a brand new scalpel blade, we're going to slice that up into strips. What's going to be really important is to keep those widths the same, so I'm going to start with the masking tape template, sticking a short length onto the grid of my cutting mat, and lining up carefully, so we can slice a strip off the side. We want this to be as close to the width of the slats as possible, but it doesn't have to be exact, and I'm making my best estimate, which we're going to test against the model itself, and if it's not quite right, we can always cut another. So leaving the ends in place on the cutting mat, I'm just lifting a small portion and checking the width. It doesn't even need to be that straight. Then we need to remove the rest of the central portion of the strip, wide enough for the foil, and just leaving the ends, which we now know are the correct width, and we'll use those to line up the foil for cutting, ensuring all of our strips are the same. Firstly, we need to line up the edge of the foil, itself freshly cut, so it lines up with the tape template, gradually sliding it into place, guided by the tip of our scalpel. Then with the straight edge lined up to the other side of the tape, we can carefully slice off a strip, slowly gliding the blade along the edge of the ruler, barely pressing down at all, so the tip doesn't snag, any minor crumpling smoothed out with a fingertip. Then with the first carefully set aside, we can get on with the second, following the same procedure. For the purpose of the video, I'm making this look a lot easier than it actually was. It took much longer to line up the foil and the straight edge than shown here, edging the foil back and forth until perfectly aligned and ready to cut. And I messed up more than one along the way, either letting it slip during cutting, making the width uneven, or pressing down too hard with the blade, ruching the foil into a concertina, too much to simply smooth back out. But even after some discards, rejecting those that didn't look quite right, I'd got more than enough to get on with. What I'm not going to do is cut them to length before applying to the model. Instead, I want to stick on a longer piece for each one, with the ends overhanging, and trim them in situ. So it's on with a thin piece of masking tape across the ends of each of the slats, so we'll know where to cut. First along the outside edge, and then the inside, making sure the edge of the tape butts up to the moulding, so our foil will cover just the bits of the slats that it should, which is actually slightly in from the end. And with both sides of the radiator taped, we can get on with sticking down the foil. But instead of glue, I'm going to be using paint, or rather gloss varnish, applied with a very fine paintbrush. There are several very good reasons for using this rather than any kind of adhesive. First of all, because it's essentially the same stuff, it's not going to react in any way to the paint below, so we can brush it onto the bars, knowing it's just going to sit on the surface. And as it's gloss just like the paint, it isn't going to show even if we get some over the sides. But we do want to take care to brush it as accurately as possible. Obviously it's not going to be as strong as glue, but for our purposes that really doesn't matter. Neither is it a problem that it dries really slowly. In fact, that's an advantage, as it gives us plenty of time to work with it. And in fact, the first thing we want to do is to let it start to dry, waiting at least 10 to 15 minutes for the surface to go tacky. Now we come to the tricky bit, putting on the foil strips, cutting them to just longer than what we need, and extremely carefully lining them up with the bars, with their coat of tacky varnish, overlapping the masking tape at either end, being careful to keep them central, and of course straight. There's a reasonable degree of wiggle room with the varnish, so they can be shifted about a bit, and when you're completely happy with the position, they can very gently be stroked down with the tip of the scalpel. 1 down, just 7 to go, and again, for the video, I'm not going to show the application of all of them, just a glimpse of what is a bit of a laborious process, some going down easier than others, a few having to be abandoned altogether, but patience will be rewarded, and with the varnish staying tacky for a while, we really can take our time. But that does also mean we want to keep our fingers away from the bits we haven't done yet, so worth considering doing half of the radiator at a time, just varnishing up 4 of the slats, and foiling those before going on to the others. And if for any reason you do run out of strips, you can always go back to the template and cut some more, knowing they'll be the same width as the ones we've already done. Once we're absolutely sure that everything is dry, we can give them a quick burnish with the back of a thumbnail, and check they're well and truly stuck, before going on to trim the ends, using the tape as our guide. And it's well worth popping in another fresh blade, as we want it to be as sharp as possible, there still being a risk of dragging the end of the foil, or chipping one of the corners. And when all 4 are done, we can peel away the tape, nice and slowly, so we can stop immediately if any haven't been cut properly. Then it's on with the other side, cutting the foil along the edge of the tape, carefully peeling that away, and brushing off any loose ends. Same with the inside ends of the bars, carefully cutting all 8 before slowly peeling back the tape, making absolutely sure we don't lift any of the foil. Although as you can see, I have inadvertently pulled up a bit of the paint, just at the bottom of the radiator, which fortunately will be hidden by the bumper. To finish up, a smooth in of the ends with the back of the thumbnail, and a clean up of any loose ends that got left behind. And if you want to make absolutely sure everything is stuck, you could add a tiny blob of varnish to the ends. But if you do, just make sure that's properly dry before going on to apply the central strip. This is narrower than the others, so we don't need to use our template, but we do need to make sure it's even all the way down. And being thinner, cutting is that much more challenging. It took me 3 goes to get it right. My initial attempts either tearing or crumpling under the pressure of the blade, but third time lucky, and I can apply exactly as before, taping the ends, then brushing on the varnish with my thin brush, making sure I've got an even coating all the way down. Then as before, noting the time, so we can ensure it dries for at least 10 to 15 minutes before applying the foil. The longer strip is that much more difficult to manoeuvre, but again, we've got plenty of time. The varnish staying tacky for a while, so no need to rush, lifting the foil and moving across as required. First the bottom end, and then the top, which I realised would be much easier to do without the tape, allowing me to centre it on the circular badge. I also realised I had enough of the strip to do above the badge, a job I was planning to leave for later, so a brief pause to varnish, allowed to go tacky, and press home that last little bit, tucking in under the radiator cap. Then just like before, having left for several hours to dry completely, we can cut the end of the foil and peel back the tape, which unfortunately has taken more of the paint with it, but the foil's good and the damage won't take much to repair. Fortunately no such problem at the top, where I can just clip off the end of the foil, which even though I say so myself, has come out pretty well. And now we just need to fix the bits that didn't, touching up with a bit of crimson gloss, which as most of this bit is covered up by the bumper, won't stick out like a sore thumb. Then with the final stroke, just below the end of the foil, we can leave our paint to dry. For the finishing touches, we are going to use a bit of silver paint, just for the radiator cap and the badge. There's a decal for this, so we want a nice even circular background, adding to the bit of foil that runs through the middle, making sure we don't go over the edge. Then the same for the radiator cap. If I was feeling really ambitious, I might try and foil this too, using something like a silver leaf, which being much thinner than the aluminium foil, can be shaped to the contours, but I think I'll stick with the paint this time round. Then all that remains is to apply the water slide transfers, and even at 1/24th scale these are pretty tiny, so we'll need a bit of care to apply, in particular making sure the badge is in the middle of our circle and the griffin emblem is the right way up, rotating with the soft paintbrush as required, and dabbing home with the cotton bud, leaving it to set for a little while before we get on with the next one, the name badge. No danger of getting this the wrong way up, but it does need a bit of coaxing to get straight and make sure it's central on the bar, directly above one of our chrome strips. Then when set, we've got a final use for our gloss varnish, daubing a bit on top of the badge for that enamelled effect, and some on the Bedford brand name, helping blend in the carrier film and protect the decal. Although after all that work I'm not going to take any chances, with only the carefulest of handling. And here's the finished model, with my radiator trim glinting like real chrome, an effect I hope you'll try for yourself, along with some of the other techniques I've used on this truck. And of course if you do, don't forget to like and subscribe.